All right, guys, welcome back to the Buck Fever podcast. I'm Noah.
I'm Jake.
And we are on episode number 2. I'm a little bit under the weather today, but I got some good meds in me, so I'm feeling good enough we can try and record an episode for you guys. I know we had said in the first episode that we were going to try and do these more and more often, and so we're going to try and stick to that. We can't really say we're going to do it more often and then miss the second episode. We gotta at least have the first 2 going. So we've got 2 episodes in a row now, and we also told you guys that we would have the podcast available in more locations. So I do have a bit of an update on that. So as always, the podcast is always going to be available on YouTube. That's where all of our other content is, all of our other videos. So you can always find our content and our podcast on our YouTube channel, which is Buck Fever Outdoors. So expanding beyond YouTube, and you can watch it there. So if you want to watch the podcast, you got to watch it on YouTube. If you just want to listen to it, we now have the podcast available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Amazon Music, Audible, TuneIn and Alexa, iHeartRadio, Player FM, Listen Notes, Samsung, Podchaser, Boomplay, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castro, and Castbox. So that is a bunch of them that I have never heard of.
I've heard about 2.
Yeah. YouTube is where we've always been, and then Spotify and Apple Podcasts are the ones that I normally would get other podcasts from, especially Spotify. So that's a big one, being able to get on there. We are still working on getting it onto 4 other platforms, which would be Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, and Deezer. So we're going to try and get it up on those as soon as we can. This is obviously ongoing. These are pre-recorded, so there's a chance that it's already up on one of those platforms by the time this comes out. But the first ones that I listed, the main ones being YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, it's already up and running. You can go and find the Buck Fever podcast there. And soon to come will be Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, and Deezer. So that's exciting news. I'm glad we were able to, get it up onto those other platforms, so that it's not just limited to YouTube, because obviously it's nice to have everything on YouTube and still be able to go and watch a podcast if you have the time for that, but not everybody does. So having it on other platforms where you can just listen is obviously a really nice feature. So let's get into it a little bit. We had a pretty eventful weekend last weekend. It was coming off of a holiday, coming off of New Year's. So we had Monday off of work, which allowed us to get out into the woods. We did some rabbit hunting, some squirrel hunting, and that video is live on our YouTube channel, so you can see all of that. But somewhere in the middle of all of that came a pretty cool find.
Yeah, we stumbled upon a pretty cool buck that we found when we were driving from spot to spot, and that's something I've never done before, and I don't think you have either, correct?
No.
And kind of where we hunt, it's kind of rare for them to still be there, full head of a full head of a buck, because everybody up there is kind of the same as us, and if they see a deer, they want it. It's a cool find. So we were fortunate enough to actually find we were driving by, and I could see just one of his sides sticking up, and I was like, I think that's a horn. So I'm like, I don't know if it's a shed though, just to be sitting like that in the middle of a ditch.
Right.
So we turned around and went back, and sure enough, we get out, and the snowplow, we had a bunch of windstorms come through 2 weeks ago, so the plows went into the ditch more and plowed back because everything was blown onto the road. So he must have got hit right before that, and then got buried underneath all that, and it started to warm up a little bit, so we had some meltage going on, and so we pull over, and Noah lifts it up, and sure enough, it's a full carcass, and we did everything legal. We got in touch with the DNR. We figured we kind of knew you had to do that, and the first number we called, they kind of sent us to direct a voicemail where they were almost out of office type thing on a Monday for the holidays is what they said. And
I think I called the Madison DNR main office, which was closed. So then I had contact info for some of the local DNR that we have around where we live, which is not where we hunt. But I figured that I could at least reach out, see if he was available, and if he was, he could point me in the right direction to get it registered and try and do the right thing. Obviously, we film everything we do, so we don't want to be putting out anything that's either showing us doing something wrong or illegal or promoting something like that, obviously. So within that video also is the hotline that you can call. So that's what it turned out being is I know a lot of people talk about you have to get like a salvage tag or whatever. It wasn't anything like that. It was you just call this hotline, and it's all computerized, right? It's just a computerized voice that comes on. They ask you some questions. You just punch it in on the keypad. They basically just asked, about your DNR information.
Just your customer number and
right,
like where you found it, what county, and that's pretty much it if it's a buck or a doe.
Yeah.
And like Noah said, I thought we were gonna salvage tag, and then we were gonna have to have a warden come out and do all this, and we were gonna be there for like hours, but didn't turn out to be that at all.
No, it wasn't anything like that, and that's a good lesson too, because I know a lot of people, whether they find roadkill like we did, or you find deadheads in the woods or anything of that nature, it isn't the big long process that we maybe thought that it was, which would lead people to not go about it the right way. It's like 5 minutes. I mean, it took us longer because we didn't know, but
just
if
to
you
find everything pretty much, to find what numbers to call and who to call.
Exactly. So if you have that number, and it's a good idea if you watch that video to save that number in your phone if you're in the state of Wisconsin. It's different in every state, and that's some states you legitimately do have to go get a salvage tag, get a warden out there, go through all of that. For us in Wisconsin, statewide, you call that hotline, it gets taken care of. They sent you an email with a confirmation number.
Yeah, right away.
I was also able to just write down the confirmation number in case we ever, were stopped by the DNR and whatever. So right, yeah, with the cops who came and found us. That was interesting. We put that in the video, but we didn't put much on the thumbnail or the title or whatever. We just kind of left it in the middle there, but that definitely made it more interesting.
Yeah, we kind of faced another challenge of, okay, so if we do get this, or we are allowed to take this deer, how are we gonna get it into my truck, right, or get the head off like we wanted? And for some reason, I had my fillet knife in the console, and I think it was because I left it in there for deer season in case we were cutting up deer at the cabin, and so I had that in there, and I didn't think I'd be able to. I mean, I cut right through all the neck and the skin and stuff, but I didn't think it would be able to get the neck part, like the bone part out. And Noah said, just twist it. So he was like finishing up on the phone, and I was cutting away at it, and I twisted it, turned it around 360 once, and it came right off. And next thing you knew, we were getting ready to go on our way, which was pretty cool because I didn't think it would be that quick. I was calling people. I was like, who lived there or close to there. I was like, do you have this, or can I come get this and stuff like that? And
yeah, we were going to be looking for a Sawzall or a hacksaw or something maybe, but we had done this a couple other times. So my dad shot a buck at one point that he just wanted to get a Euro mount on, and then we had found a roadkill buck on the property that I hunt on, just not like near a road, right? So the one we found was by a ditch. The one that I found that was most likely hit by a car was like half a mile from the nearest road. So that one made it a lot further in. So it was just a little bit less obvious that it was roadkill. It could have been something else. It wasn't shot, but didn't look super sick. So we had done that a couple other times, and I just remembered my dad. It had been a few years now, but I just remember my dad took a knife, just cut through as much meat as he could, and then just twisted using the antlers, just twist it around and snap it right off. And it's a little bit gruesome to kind of picture that, but it legitimately works.
Yeah, it worked a lot better than I thought it was gonna. And I think him being under the snow kind of kept him preserved a little bit because the knife cut through him pretty easily. I thought he'd be frozen. I mean, he's been under snow or out in the weather for how long, but it actually worked fairly well.
I mean, he stunk. Don't get me
Horrible.
wrong. He was really, really stinky. We figured he'd probably be dead, 2 weeks?
At least. We
found him after New Year's, and he was probably dead. He was for sure dead before Christmas.
Which is right before when all those storm. Like, I wouldn't really call it a storm, but just
Yeah.
really windy, snow blowing stuff came through. So that's kind of why we figured he got pushed up underneath all that snow in the ditch.
Right. So it could have been 1 week, could have been 2. He was not in good shape, but better shape than he would have been if he was just out in the elements and getting picked at and everything. Because, like you said, the only thing that was really visible was just his one side.
Yeah, which was kind of crazy going 60 miles an hour to just spot that. But
It's always crazy when you do that because we'll just be driving by or walking by or whatever, and you just kind of spot those things. We were just driving along, and you're like, "That's a shed. That's a shed. There's definitely a shed down there." And there's all kinds of like cattails and other stuff that could really look like a shed when you're going that fast and driving down. And I mean, anytime you think you see something like that, you got to turn around and investigate. But you would think that was a super busy road, which you could see in the video. You would think that if that was really a shed, it wouldn't last there.
yeah, well,
Like
that's
somebody would have picked it up.
exactly. I was surprised to go over there, and that's what it was. I'm like, oh my god.
So turn around and then pull down another road, turn back around so that we're back on the right side of the road, pull over, and sure enough, it's just this big buck. I mean, it was a really good buck for just finding it hit by a car on the side of the road.
Sucks that they go out that way and someone can harvest
Somebody's
them.
probably
And
really, really upset about that.
yeah, but
But then we're getting it all figured out. So we've got our confirmation number. Everything's good. You got the head removed. We're like ready to go.
just about to get into the truck to leave.
And we noticed when we were sitting there that there was a police officer who came like from the same direction we were coming, went past us and pulled somebody over out in front of us while we were sat there on the phone with the DNR and cutting off the skull. So then once he's done with the guy that he pulled over, he whips back around, and it turns out he was just coming to check on us. I mean, he couldn't have cared less about what we were doing or what we were taking. He didn't care to see our confirmation number.
No.
It was nothing like that. It was more like
We had the hazards on, so he
Yeah.
was making sure we weren't broke down or
exactly.
lost something or something like that.
Yeah, he was just trying to make sure everything was all good. So
He was cool. He was really cool.
yeah, it turned out to not be any sort of an issue at all. But it was just kind of funny. We're sitting there doing everything right, and then all of a sudden the cops are there and the lights are on. And
Yeah, he put his lights on, obviously, behind us. So, but he must have gave that person a warning that he pulled over because they were pulled over for like 5 minutes, if that.
I don't know.
Wasn't very long.
I haven't gone through that yet. Knock on wood. But I don't know how long it usually takes. Maybe he's just a fast rider.
Yeah, that could be it.
I don't know, but that really helped because at that point in the day we had shot 2 rabbits at 2 properties.
Walked about 10 miles, so
yeah,
one rabbit for every 5 miles.
yeah. I mean, you're happy with being able to get that kind of a harvest, but I think we thought that it was going to be a lot more. I think we were kind of surprised that it didn't exactly turn out. I mean, especially at your property, you said in the video you shoot like 12 a year there, so then to only see one.
I mean, we didn't hit the honey hole parts of it, but I mean, usually where we did go, there's usually rabbits. So I don't know what was going on there, but I guess we'll find out in a couple weekends when we go for that tournament. So
yeah, there's plenty of time left, but that was a big morale booster. We were just going to be on our way to our last property, knowing we could only shoot squirrels on that one, because we're also saving that property for a tournament that's going on later in the year. That's not one that we're going to be a part of, but somebody else.
plus it was like kind of getting cold, cloudy. I don't think any squirrels are going to be out. The only thing we had going for us was that it wasn't windy.
Yes.
So we were kind of like, oh, okay, I guess we'll go try this and see what happens. And then we find that, and man, we were jacked up, just spirits through the roof, and could have ran a mile probably. I mean, we were just ecstatic.
Yeah, the sore legs and the wet clothes and all that stuff, it went away real fast when you find something like that. It's just such a cool thing, especially not being one of our bucks that we cared about trying to make it through the winter. It's like that's somebody else's now. I don't really have to worry about that.
Yeah, stinks for them, but
it does. He's pretty cool. He's got a lot of character, and so then we're in the process of trying to clean that up. So we harvested our 2 rabbits, found that dead head, ended up being able to shoot 4 squirrels, which was really awesome.
Tried for some crows, which are insanely tough if you've never tried to kill a crow. I mean, those things are like, they're like flying pterodactyls almost.
It's like
Well, pterodactyls fly, but
you can get them. they did fly at one point, yes. You can get them to come in really easy. It's just they come in too far out of shotgun range. So like they we just have a call that we can use for crows or coyotes or raccoons, whatever. And so you turn on the crow call and they come in like immediately. But
very curious animals.
Yes. And they send a spy. So they just send one guy in to go figure out what's going on, and he flies way up high. And I don't know if they ever realize that it's humans or what's going on, but then eventually a couple more will come, but they all stay just out of range. And then when you think that they're in range and you shoot, they must not be in range.
Yeah, I have no idea.
They must have really thick skin or something. But
I mean, I knocked one out of the tree. That isn't making the video, but I knocked one out and I shot him 3 times and he fell, hit the ground, and then just disappeared. Like, ran away. We were tracking him.
Yeah, we were tracking blood on a crow through the woods.
Like 150 yards almost.
Yeah.
And we get up to where we last saw him. He's just gone. And we didn't think he could fly, but he must have mysteriously got up in the tree somehow, and we couldn't find him, which was insane to us.
I don't know what happened, because you had the shotgun, obviously. I had brought my 22 with, just knowing that squirrels were going to be an option, and it ended up paying off on a rabbit, too, because it got a little ways out of range, and I was able to get it with that. But once you had it knocked down, I was trying to shoot it with that a couple times, and, I mean, sometimes I knew for sure I missed, but there was like 2 or 3 shots where I was positive that I hit that thing.
Yeah, I have no idea what happened there. I mean, I just thought it was crazy. We were tracking a crow
right,
with blood.
And we put in the effort, too. This wasn't like, oh, we shot a crow, who cares, let's just leave it be. This was like...
Yeah, we wanted that thing.
We legitimately were doing everything we could to find that crow, put it down, put it out of its misery. Who knows where
I mean, like, through the thickest part of the woods that we can hunt. I mean, just buckthorn and brush, and we were going after it, and he was bound and determined not to let us catch him, so
yeah, mystery crow, I have no idea where he is, but turns out they're like one of the hardest animals out there to get, I guess, because we've gotten a couple.
Like 3.
But
and
also...
we've probably shot at 50.
That's true, but I feel like we don't put in the best effort because we don't...
Well, if you wear blaze orange,
it
doesn't
blaze
really
orange
help.
Right. And we're not hiding ourselves the best.
We didn't have decoys either. I mean, we just kind of do it for fun because it's just cool. As soon as you hit that call, that crow fighting, they just swarm. Like, they just erupt from the trees and they're there, which is pretty cool. I mean, it gives you like a rush for a little bit. And
right. It's pretty cool just to know that you were able to pull in an animal that you're going after like that. But I don't know. I don't know how to get them. Do you have to hunt them like ducks? Do you have to like shelter down in a blind?
I think some more cover and decoys would probably be beneficial to us.
Man, I don't know. And then it's not worth it because they're just crows.
Yeah, and you're doing all this work. I mean, we just do it after, like, we're walking through, like, oh, let's take a break.
Right. Yeah.
Throw the call out, see what happens.
Just for fun, but we're not the best at it. Maybe someday we'll actually put a little bit more effort into it and see what we could do. But, yeah, so we had a little bit of that worked in there. But eventually the day is over. We get it home. And then we let a few days go by. And we knew that we were going to try and clean it up, make a Euro mount out of it. I'm hoping that it will eventually end up in the podcast studio here at some point.
I think it will.
It's almost cleaned. But the thing was, you brought it home, and you're like, yeah, we can leave it in the garage. It'll be frozen out there. It won't be that big a deal.
Well, I had another one in there for, like, almost a month, too, that it was frozen solid, so I mean it didn't really stink. And
but that one, we threw that one in there for like 2 days, and you're like, yeah, we gotta clean this thing up. We gotta.
They were bad. They started because it warmed up a little bit. I mean, it got up into like the 40s, so it was kind of unthawing, and it was not pleasant.
Not pleasant.
Nor was it pleasant when we boiled them. I think that was worse.
Oh yeah, way worse. You can't even really describe it. It's just so bad. It's such a bad smell. If you could
smell something through a video, you'd be able to smell that. Like, that's how bad it was.
It's literally the worst. I hate it. But That's another thing that we've done a couple times with some of our deadheads. So I was kind of used to that. I knew a little bit of what to do, and it was just a little bit of, touch and go there, just kind of trying things and seeing what was going to go on, just some trial and error. And the main thing is, to start, you got to cut off all of that stinky crap that's on there to begin with. I mean, you got to get rid of the ears, you got to get rid of the neck, you got to take off as much meat as you possibly can to start with, and that's probably the worst part because it just stinks.
Yeah, time consuming. Your hands are cold. I mean, kind of frozen, but in the long run, it's the best to get as much off as you possibly can,
Right.
because otherwise you're not out there for 8 hours trying to boil and pressure wash, pressure wash.
Yeah, we put a full day into it, but that's the other thing is
I think we learned a lot though.
we did. But it's so cold here right now. It's not like we waited till summer to be able
Yeah.
to do it, or even
Spring.
We just decided to do it now because it was stinky and we had to get it done. But we don't like to let it wait too long, especially not outside, because here we have 2 bucks, one that your cousin shot and one that we found, and the antlers are perfect. Everything's perfect on them. So you leave them outside and you just risk squirrels and bugs and whatever else eating at them and ruining your antlers. You can't get that back.
Nope.
Not to mention the sun bleaching them out,
Yep.
which you can kind of get back using some wood stain. I've done that on deadheads that we found or sheds that we found that have been laying out there forever. Usually ones that, like this year's sheds, would be pretty fresh. You wouldn't really have to do that, but if you find some from previous years, they can be pretty bleached out, just solid white. And you can kind of bring them back a little bit with some stain, but you just risk so much damage to the antlers. And
It's not the same either. I mean, you kind of know what deer you shoot, and if you're staining it, or kind of even if this is probably an unpopular opinion, but if an antler breaks off before you shoot the deer, like early in the season, and you have pictures of them, like they'll some taxidermists can recreate that horn, and I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of that. I mean, I had a buck one year that I shot that was missing a brow tine, and he lost it like 2 days before I shot him. And they asked if I wanted to redo it, but I figured, I mean, that's how he was when I shot him. So I mean, that's kind of how he deserves to be presented on the wall. So
yeah, I agree. I think the one exception to that would be if you shot a deer and then in the process of it running away and dying, it broke something off and you found it.
100%. I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
I think then you probably put it back on there. I know I would.
Yes, for sure. I would do that too.
But I think I agree with you. If you shoot one that's broken up, but it had the antlers previously, I don't think I would get them redone, because it's also not necessarily all about score.
No.
And I feel like you couldn't count it anyway. You could guess. You could say, okay, well, if
could
he
get
had
close,
all that,
yeah.
yeah, if he had this tine that he ended up snapping in half, the extra 5-6 inches, whatever it is, maybe less, depending upon which tine it is, what's snapped off, you could get a better guess of what the score is. But if you're scoring it based on inches that the taxidermist added, like that's not what a score is anyways.
No, you didn't have when you killed him, so.
Yeah, so I agree on that. But these were all perfect, and there's different methods that people have talked about, things that you can use. Some people say you should just tape up the antlers, throw like a tote over top of it, and bury the skull and let the bugs eat it in the dirt.
Which isn't a bad idea, just it takes a long time for that.
It takes a while, right?
Decompose, and
because even though we did have to put in a full 7-8 hour day trying to get these cleaned up, and it's still not done, you can do it in a day or do it in a weekend. And we also didn't have the best equipment. It was cold. Like there was things that are disadvantage. Yeah. You could probably clean it up in a day, for sure in a weekend, and then it's done and it's good to go.
And you did it.
Yeah, right. Because then you're saving money. You have that little bit of extra pride for doing something like that yourself, which is always cool. And that's what we like to do. We're not gonna take that one in to go have somebody else do it. We just found it on the side of the road. So, and then the same thing with the one that your cousin shot.
Kind of worked out good that they asked me to do it, and I was like, I'll give it a shot. And then we found that other one, so I was like, oh, might as well do 2 at one time, and see how they turn out. And you can kind of learn a little bit from doing one first and then like, oh, let's do this different on this next one, or don't do this type thing.
That's the other thing. We spent 8 hours, but we had 2 of them to do. If we just had the one to do it, yeah, we definitely could have got that one done in a day. But the way that we like to do it, that you can get it done in a day or a weekend. You don't have to wait forever. You don't really have to pay much money. You got to cut off all of the meat, like we said, and then you got to try and boil it and then pressure wash it. So it's a constant back and forth between boiling, pressure washing, cutting away, and you just kind of keep doing that until eventually you have a clean, finished product.
I mean, it probably would have been better for us if we had a nice warm garage to cut everything off and to start. I mean, we were doing it outside. My garage is full of wooden parts because we're building a sturgeon shack, and my mom's parked in there. And either way, we just didn't have a ton of room to do that, and we were doing it in the backyard. So if you have that, it kind of cuts it in half, and it's not as painful, so to say, where you're out in the cold trying to skin a deer, basically.
Right. So we've always used it's just an old fryer with some old pots that would have been used for like a fish fry or whatever. So it just hooks up to some propane, and it just heats up the burner, and then you set the pot of water on top of it. And at first, it depending upon the size of the pot, whatever, I'm not sure what that one was, but it's always going to look like the deer's not going to fit. And then once you take off a bunch of the skin and everything, then it's like, okay, it's going to fit. And the ones we have are just perfect. I would say it's probably gotta be close to 1 foot. Do you think it's
probably a little taller than 1 foot
taller?
In height? I don't know what the diameter is, but
right, but 14, 16.
Yeah, right
tall,
around
maybe.
there. If you enough for it to angle the skull in and or from like the bottom and then the top of the skull rest
right,
up
as long as you can get the nose on the bottom corner and then still have the top of the bases within the water, at that point you're gonna be doing okay. So that's what we use to boil it, and we usually don't like to use any bleach because I've found that with bleach, it doesn't turn any bone white, it turns it yellow, which is not what you're going for, and it weakens the crap out of that bone. So it just eats away at it. The bone gets very weak, very brittle. Most of the teeth will fall out or become really, really loose. And without any of the bleach, we didn't have any of that. Now, I don't know if it would have been easier maybe to get some of that material taken off.
I think if we would have let them boil longer than we did, another thing we were learning, if you're going to try this at home or do it on your own, I would probably let them boil as long as possible and then take it out, because I think we figured out that the longer they boil, the easier all the stuff comes off, the muscle and whatever.
And the key with that was trying to not make it like boil over.
Yeah, that was our problem. We were getting it too hot because we figured as hot as possible would be better, but that doesn't, because the water just ends up boiling over the side, puts the flame out, and you just got to start the process all over again. And
it's cold, and but then the pot is really hot, so then you got to take something else to grab onto it, and it's a whole thing. But once we kind of found that sweet spot where you could just get enough propane in there, you could just get it hot enough that it would boil but not boil over, then it was like perfect. And when we just left them in there for a long time, it really loosened things up, and then you can hit it with the pressure washer. And that was something that I've always been really, really skeptical of. I mean, those things have some force.
Yeah,
like they really will just light that up. And I've kind of been like, well, it's probably fine on the bigger bone structure, but you look at the cartilage and the stuff up in the nose or behind the eyes and stuff like that, it's like, man, I don't know. I just never trusted the pressure washer to not destroy it.
It's some thin stuff, so
it is.
You don't want to wreck it, because then your mount's all wrecked if you break that cartilage in the nose. And
at that point, you're gonna pretty much have to cut the sheds off and just use them as sheds.
Yep.
Which is still fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it sucks when you had your heart set on a Euro mount. But we tried it, and when you look up other YouTube videos, pretty much everybody uses a pressure washer.
Yep.
And it's like, well, if everybody's doing it, let's give it a shot. And we had some struggles with that because we have one, but my dad was gone. It's in a storage shed. He's got the keys for it. Can't get that. You had borrowed one from your uncle. Your uncle never gave you the battery for it. So then we couldn't get it started.
Couldn't get the pull start to work, which was weird. And
I'm guessing it had to have a battery in it.
we didn't want to deal with it. I mean, we were kind of in not a rush, but like we were boiling them, so we wanted to pressure wash them right away. So then we had to go to Plan C, and thankfully your neighbor had one and was willing to let us borrow it. So
yep. So shout out to my neighbor for giving us his pressure washer to borrow for the day, and that one wasn't easy either. We didn't just go and plug that one in and it worked great. We would trip the breaker on the exterior outlet at your house and then the interior, and so then finally we ended up having to go to the outlet in the garage, which should have had a little bit more power, and that was somehow able to make it work. And then still it didn't really work, but then finally we just got it running and it was working, and it was like, okay, don't touch it, don't mess with it, just let it go. And then it worked great.
not to mention the water, the hose was freezing constantly.
Oh, yeah.
It was like 20 degrees. So if in between the times switching the pressure washers, it froze. So we had to take it down to my basement, heat it up in a sink with warm water, then carry it out there. And that's probably why it took us 8 hours. But I mean,
if you can do it in a warmer environment, that's definitely the way to go.
Don't boil it in your house though, or in your garage, or you would have to burn the house down if you did that. So
absolutely, it's the worst smell ever. It's like you can't breathe through your nose, but then you're outside and it's less than 20 degrees, so your nose is running, but you got to leave the snot in there because it's plugging it up so you don't have to smell it. Because if you wipe your nose or blow it out or whatever, and you take a breath of fresh air, that air is not fresh.
Yeah, and then
it is so bad.
Yeah, it's horrible. Your clothes smell like that. I mean, I washed myself immediately when I got in the house, and it came out for the most part. I mean, I don't really smell it on my clothes that I have, but it was just horrible.
The other clutch part is after you get to a certain point where you have like 90% of all the meat off of there, you can get rid of that water, and I would put that in the yard or down the sewer. That's not going in a sink. That is...
It's going to kill all your grass, probably.
That stuff's vile. But you can dump all that out, get fresh water, and put a little bit of Dawn dish soap in there. And that seemed to help us out a ton also. Scent-wise, it was much better. And it's also going to kind of help to take away some of that tissue, just kind of loosening up that grease. I mean, it's similar to... It's obviously... helps you wash your dishes, so it's kind of a similar thing. It does something to kind of loosen that stuff up, and it smells much better. So once you get to that point, then we were kind of okay. It wasn't the worst at that point.
Yeah, the Dawn dish soap is killer for sure.
Yeah, that helped out a ton. So yeah, now they're both pretty much done. We still have a little bit to go. We kind of ran out of daylight when we were cleaning those up, but I think we're going to get back after it maybe this weekend, try and get that finished up. And then obviously that's going to be a video for you guys, so everything that we're talking about now, we're going to show you all of that stuff, show you how we did it, walk you through it, give you some tips and tricks. And that I think it's really, really useful because there's a lot of times when you wouldn't be getting a shoulder mount. You know, whether it's a deadhead that you find in the woods when you're shed hunting, because that happens to us sometimes, whether it's on our property, whether it's on public, whatever. You're shed hunting, you find a deadhead. If it's fresh enough, there's probably still going to be some stuff on it that's going to need to get cleaned up. Maybe there's not, but you still are going to want to clean it, kind of disinfect it a little bit.
If you want to bring it into your house or put it somewhere in like the garage or something, you don't want to just, hang it up there and take your chances. There's a lot of chances there's bugs or just...
It's best to clean it, get the stink out of it.
Yeah,
it's just,
that too.
Right. Because it's easy enough if you know what you're doing. And if it's something that you find on the side of the road, hit by car, God forbid it's a deer that you hit with your car, that would really suck. But if it's a really nice one, it's like, well, hey, at least I could get a Euro mount out of it, I guess. Actually, if you hit one with a car, you could probably get a shoulder mount.
Yeah.
Be just as fresh as if you shot one.
Take all the meat home. You get all that.
It would suck though, because you got to pay to repair your car. Maybe
It's an
insurance will
expensive
cover
deer.
it.
Really expensive deer, especially if you get it mounted.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know if anybody's ever done that.
I don't know.
I'm sure people have, but
I don't want to be the first. Unless you hit it with your car, I'll mount it.
if you pay for it, I will.
Yeah, that's fine.
Not on purpose. I would never.
I'm not paying for the car. I'll pay
No.
for the mount, though.
I would never go out of my way to hit a deer.
No. I wish I could have sent my truck out that way. That would have been the greatest ever.
I still think jumping it off a quarry would have been cooler.
Quarry would have been nice. I don't know which quarry would have taken it.
We could have found one.
It'd be kind of a mess. It gets to the bottom.
Just cost some money to
Blows
clean it
up.
up.
Maybe they could just bring in a big magnet down there.
Yeah, they got those big front end
Maybe,
loaders.
yeah.
They could just
Yeah, I'm sure. Anyways, RIP to my truck. She's in a better place now.
way better.
Way better. Way better. Any place other than our driveway is a better place. So yeah, but no, we're gonna get that all cleaned up. That video is gonna be coming out really soon, so that'll be there for watching right now and for future use. You find something, you shoot something, you decide you want to get it cleaned up, do your own Euro mount. That's a great video. It's going to be a great resource to show you how to do that. And something that we talked about that is probably going to make it in the video. There's some options too for what you can do for like a backing for it to kind of make it more than just the Euro mount itself, which is cool. But if you make some sort of something to put it on, that can be a little bit cooler too.
Or if you're really fancy, you can dip the skull.
We have a couple that are hydro dipped. We didn't do them ourselves. We
I have a
paid
couple
for
too.
those.
Yeah.
Did you do those? You got
No,
them?
that's the guy who did the European mounts.
see,
Did them.
I don't know how to.
I think you just get a bin of water almost, and you spray. I don't know if this is right, but I've seen videos where you just spray a bunch of like spray paint in lines or whatever pattern you want, and you kind of just.
But isn't it specific paint that you got?
Yeah, I think you probably got to get some sort of paint. And if you look it up, I'm sure it'll tell you.
Yeah, it's probably along the lines of pressure washing, where it seems like a bad idea, and then you do it, and it probably would turn out really cool. That would maybe be something we could try.
Yeah.
If we find another one, hopefully not on one of our properties this year, but maybe driving around again or something like that. That'd be a cool thing to try. If we ever do that, we'll have to make a video on that too, obviously, and show the progress. But yeah, so moving on from that a little bit, you've been doing a little bit of late season deer hunting. It's kind of winding down now, which we also talked about in the rabbit video. Like, it's pretty much over. I'm done.
I think it's done.
I think Colby and Eli are done. You're probably done. I think in some counties or some parts of the state, it still goes to the end of January.
Yeah, I was looking at it the other day, and I don't think our counties are in it, but
No.
just kind of random ones all over. But I think it's mostly for like your deer population. If you have a lot of deer, you're allowed to hunt later, which makes sense.
And I think other places in the country still have deer seasons that are available. I think there's still some rut stuff.
Well, like
going
down
on.
south and like
Way
Oklahoma
south,
and
yeah.
Texas. I mean, they're kind of just starting them, or well, shouldn't say that, but it's like they're November right now almost.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird how that works, but just figured we could talk a little bit about some of the late season hunting, not only hunts that you've been on and had some success with, but also some tips and tricks there, some things that you could look for, because I've found that with late season deer hunting, you either have the deer or you don't have the deer. It's like you either have 40 does and fawns just piled up that are going to be there pretty much every night. You could set your clock to it, or there's not a deer in sight, because that's kind of where we're at with the property that I hunt at. We're getting trail camera pictures of squirrels and coyotes, and there hasn't been a single deer there since like November or December. It's just desolate. But then property like yours and some of the surrounding neighboring properties, especially if you're driving around kind of right before dark, you could see 40 deer out in the field. Easy.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of something that I've learned in the last 5 years when they've kind of had these holiday hunts, and being off of school, I could go a lot. And if you have any source of food that's been left and great bedding, even good bedding, you're going to see deer. We have this really thick pine behind us, like 40 acres of just straight pines. And I mean, they love that. They live there all year long, and especially in winter, they herd up. And I mean, you could just sit there and watch them just file out like 20, 30 at a time. I've seen up to like almost 40 come out of there at one time, and they'll come over and eat in our cut fields, which is awesome that we have, because I mean, they need food. It's cold. They need to stay warm, so they're gonna eat, and they're burning a lot more calories and stuff. So they need to eat to stay warm and not lose all their fat. So they come out into this field, and I mean, we've shot probably over 10 in the late season. Dad and I shot 2 this year, or 1 each. We probably could have shot more if we went or shot at a couple, but
yeah,
it's very good, if a very good hunting tactic if you have late season food source, which is a little weird though, because we have food plots that had turnips and radishes in, and they're not touching it. So I'm not really completely sure what that's all about. If they just like to cut beans that are left around, or
yeah, we're in a similar situation. We plant food plots every year, and we try and plant more and more, and a lot of green food, because when it comes to the winter time, there's less water in a deer's diet. They need that pretty heavily to be able to digest their food, and that comes mostly from green plants. I've heard some things out there that are like, deer don't really need to drink much water in the summer because they can get so much moisture out of the green plants that they eat, that they have like a ton of moisture there. And as you get into the fall and the winter, they rely on that water a little bit more because there's less in the food that they're eating, and so it helps them to digest. So I don't know if that's part of it, like if you can have good water that is open, because we have water holes, but then they freeze. Sometimes they can pick through that, sometimes it just freezes all the way to the bottom, and that's just kind of that. I don't know how much water has to do with it. When you see these huge piles of deer, they're usually in cornfields or bean fields.
Yeah, everything
that were cut down.
But like if you read a lot of like when you're planting food plots, they always say turnips and radish are a winter plot where the deer should just be piling in there to dig those up and eat those. But it's like, I don't think ours are as mature as they like the people who say this are. Like, we don't have like basketball sized turnips or radishes, anything like that. But I mean, they're decent enough for a deer that's hungry to come in there and dig them up and eat them. But I mean, I pulled our cameras in the middle of December, or they were dead in the middle of December, and I didn't put new batteries in, but there's no tracks, no nothing in there. So it's kind of almost prominent that they're going to come to those cut fields of bean and corn. At least by us, that's where what's mostly planted.
Yeah. So then you also got to look at like thermal cover, because it obviously gets really cold in the winter, especially in a lot of the northern states. So they need to have that thermal cover where they can get out of the cold, get out of the wind, if there's snow and rain, stuff like that. So then you're going to be looking at a lot more like pine trees, taller grasses, real thick stuff, which is good to have regardless. I mean, you want to have good deer bedding year round, but especially in the wintertime, like you said, on your property there where you're talking, a lot of where we find them bedded down is in those pines.
With a valley.
Yeah.
A couple of valleys almost, where they can just really tuck down in there and completely escape the wind, and really doesn't even get a lot of snow down there just because there's so much pines. And if they're going to try and sit on the south side, south facing slopes, because that's usually the warmest, obviously.
Yeah.
So they can get out of the northwest winds and sit on the south slope down low or in the pines. I mean, I wouldn't want to leave there. So
yeah, we see a lot of our deer. I think they mostly go up to the hills because we're kind of down in a big valley. So we're at the bottom of the valley, but it's huge. It's like, a couple miles wide. So it's not like you're talking where it's just like real hilly and there's little valleys in there. This is like a huge valley. And so we usually see them go up to the hills, because when they're up there, they have those hills and valleys that no matter which way the wind is blowing, they can tuck down on the backside of one of them. And that's why kind of that when you talk about shed hunting and things like that, even regular just hunting deer in general, that south-facing slope can be somewhat of a myth. Yes, that's kind of more facing the sun a little bit, but I think more importantly than that is wind. They want to stay out of the wind. So they're kind of going to be where, and yes, a lot of times in the winter we see a lot of wind out of the north, but this past hunting season, we set up a ton of our stands to be used for a north wind. We never got it. Never got it.
Well, it was so warm. I mean, we talked about it a little last time that our rut has been like 60 degrees, which is usually bringing a south wind or southwest. And I mean, we had a lot more east winds than we normally do. Yeah. That's kind of like once or twice a month we get an east wind. We probably had close to 10 of those this year.
There's plenty of them.
Very rare north winds, which kind of stinks. Yeah, because like you said, we set up a lot of our stands for north winds, and a lot of our good stands for north winds, because when we're hunting, when we think we're going to be seeing a lot of bucks, is the rut when it's supposed to be cold, and a north and northwest wind is prominent. But
so when it comes to doe control, because that's something that kind of goes away then during the season when it gets into late October, you get into the rut. It's like, okay, now we don't really want to shoot any does. Do you prefer early season or late season as far as doe control goes?
Depends. I like early season just because I like shooting them with my bow, and it's kind of flipped. During early season, I kill all my does off food plots.
Yep.
Because they're in that pattern. They're hungry. They're trying to bulk up for winter. But I also have just as much fun shooting them with the gun in late season because you see a ton of deer, and you get to bring. We have an enclosed stand, so you can bring out people who normally wouldn't hunt a ton, or it's more comfortable. You can do all that, but I'd probably have to go with early season just because of the chase and the patterning and just the bow. I like that. I like being out in the woods. Everything's green, and you're right in the middle of them.
Which it's nice if you can let it go a little bit later into the season, just to let those fawns get a little bit older.
Yeah.
It's nice that way. One thing I don't really buy into is people who say you shouldn't shoot them late season because now they're pregnant with next year's fawns.
Yeah, I don't.
It's like, well, first of all, the point is to control the population.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can get a 2-for-1 deal, that seems probably pretty good. I mean, obviously, then you could argue, well, that could be a buck that's born and you want to have bucks and whatever, but
you don't know that.
You don't know that. And if you shoot them early season, that's a doe that would have been bred that didn't get bred because you shot her.
Yeah.
So, like, to me, I don't think shooting one late season is any different than shooting one early season.
And then there's also you shoot them late season, you might shoot a fawn or you might shoot a button buck, because at that point,
I've done that.
Late November or late December, they're the same size as some of those 1.5-year-old does. And if they come out together, you're looking and 150 yards away, you can't tell if he's got little nubs or not. So, I mean, that tends to happen. So
when I was younger, I made that mistake. There was a group of deer that came out of the woods. There was like 4 of them, and they were kind of moving pretty slow. Eventually, they gave me a shot, gave me enough time to check it out, and I was gun hunting. Got them all into my scope, and I didn't see nubs on any of them. Just shot the biggest one. Turned out it ended up being a button buck. So obviously that's something you want to avoid late season if it's at all possible. But there's ways to avoid it too.
Yep.
I mean, it's...
I mean, the last one that I shot, she came out all by herself, and it was a doe. It wasn't the biggest doe I've ever killed, but it was an adult doe, and she came out by herself, and I didn't shoot her right away because I was like, well, I've seen nubbies that are this big, and then a couple more fawns came out, and some more deer filtered out into the field, and I could tell that these were fawns. So I waited for them to walk by her or get close to her, and I could tell that she was bigger and taller than them. So I was like, okay, well, that's an adult doe. So I wasn't just shooting to shoot and shooting the first deer that I saw that came out. So,
and that's the best thing you can do to try and figure out what's what. Wait for more deer to present themselves, and that's one of the things that you can get late season. Early season, you're usually going to have a doe, and then probably have a fawn or 2 with it. Maybe there'll be a couple adult does, and obviously then it's easier to tell. But late season, you're generally going to see a huge pile of deer, And so if you can just wait a little bit longer, and hopefully you're hunting kind of more over an open field like that where they're probably going to be out feeding for a little while. Hopefully your wind's not blowing at them. They're not going to be spooked. So you'll be able to kind of take your time with it and be able to tell what's what. And that's really the best way to do it, is just giving it more time like that, obviously.
And that's the last thing. I mean, no one ever wants to shoot like a nubby, but it happens. I mean, what are you going to do? You can't avoid it sometimes, and who knows if that buck would even stayed for the upcoming year and
right
into the whole nubby thing or shooting the mom that might be pregnant. I've seen or I've heard and talked to other people that sometimes if there is I don't know if you believe in this, but if a nubby his mom is still around by the time he's a year and a half when he can mate, they'll leave because they don't want to mate and breed with their mom, which makes sense. So I've seen a lot of people that say if there's a fawn or a doe and a nubby, shoot the doe because that buck will stick around then because their mom's not there.
Right. I mean, we've had this, and this could be a bigger discussion for another episode too, because I've kind of shared some of my thoughts on it, where I think for humans, psychologically, our thought process is like, don't shoot a doe that has fawns with it because that's its mom, and that's sad. But I think when it comes to deer, I don't know if they have the same emotional attachment. I think they see it as like, this is the adult deer that I spend my time with. I don't know if deer actually feel emotional connections to each other.
I don't think they have long enough to really get that.
Right.
Like humans, we got years and years before we even fully understand. You're like 3 or 4 by the time you really understand, like, oh,
yeah,
this is my mom and dad.
Exactly. So
they're here for me type thing.
Yeah, I always feel like people read too much into that, where they're like, well, I can't shoot a doe that has fawns with it because it's too sad, whatever. And I think that's more a personal thing.
It is.
If you think it's sad, then that's fine. Don't shoot it. But I don't think the deer feel the same way about their relationships as people feel about people relationships. It's just different. They're animals. It's just not the same.
And I've kind of tracked this on my cameras. Like I've seen deer that I've shot with fawns that have just hooked up with another family, like another doe and fawns, because I mean, they're just out there trying to survive, so they're going to go live with someone else who's just doing the same thing they are and can help protect them. So it's sad to think about that. If you shoot their parents, they're just going to go find someone else. But it's just kind of the circle of life there.
It is, yeah, because I've heard that too, that a nub buck or a buck in general, I guess, if the mom is still in that breeding area, it'll leave and go to a different breeding area because it doesn't want to breed with its mom. That's something that makes a lot of sense. I don't know how you could really track it.
You'd almost have to have like a deer farm basically to try that and see if they wouldn't breed with them, and then you could,
which would make, I mean, I suppose they would have something biologically that they know which doe their mom is, or they're related to it, whether there's a feeling attached to that. I don't know. I'm guessing probably not, but they probably know which one is their mom, which would make sense that it would leave then. So in that case, it is that debate. Do you shoot the doe to hopefully make the buck stay? Does that buck just get hit by a car anyways? I think you shouldn't exterminate your doe population to try and...
Yeah, no, I wouldn't shoot every doe with a nubby you see.
No.
But, I mean, if you're out doe hunting and you happen to have one come into range with one and...
What do you think is a good ratio, bucks to does on a property?
Well, I mean, for us, we usually say, like, killing one buck, you should kill every 2 does to it.
Yeah.
Which is right, but, I mean, like, you obviously want to have more bucks than does because you're doing good then. That means kind of does might be even coming to find the bucks. I mean, I know Bill Winke had a 5-to-1 buck to doe ratio, which is insane. I have no idea how you even achieve that or manage that. And only, I mean, you can only kill so many bucks a year, but still have that many deer is insane to me.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you're breaking like one buck to every 4 or 5 antlerless deer. I think that's a pretty good ratio.
Yeah, I mean I've heard a lot of people say that ideally it would just be 1-to-1. For every buck you see, there's does you see, and you can kind of gauge how healthy your property is and what you might need to do based on any given sit that you have in the woods, how many bucks you see versus how many does do you see. Because I know for us, it's always like kind of a bigger deal when you see bucks in the woods because we're just so used to seeing more does and fawns. But to have that mentality where you should be seeing bucks pretty much just as often as you're seeing does, you kind of have to realize, okay, if that's not happening, I've got too many does right now and I need to shoot more of them because, like you said, that can really affect your rut.
And we've lived that the last couple of years, so that's why we shoot so many does as we do, and we're kind of understanding because our ratio probably is 1-to-5 or 1-to-6. I mean, we see a ton of does, and I mean we get a lot of bucks on camera, but we're not seeing them as much as we see the does, or like you'd think like they'd all just come onto the field. And yes, that comes with the bucks, the mature bucks we want to see are smarter and aren't coming out at 2 hours before shooting light to feed. But just the less does you have, but still having enough is kind of like the sweet spot.
Yeah, you don't want to exterminate them, but you do have to think about it in rutting terms. I mean, the rut is when bucks are traveling long distances to go out and find does. So if there's an overabundance of does in an area, that would then mean that buck doesn't have to travel as far to find more does, which means if the buck's travel is more limited, that rut is going to suck. It's not going to be as good as if there's a lot fewer does and that buck has to travel a lot further, and that's what's going to get more bucks traveling on their feet and coming into your area.
Or that buck finds a doe and he's locked down for a week because she's not fully ready to breed, but like he can tell that she's getting there.
Yep.
And then you don't see him because he doesn't have to go anywhere, or he can finds one and goes to the next, and he's just not running over the property trying to find does because he's got them all at his fingertips.
Yeah, because you guys have seen that in previous years with numbers of deer that you've shot. If you don't shoot enough does, the rut kind of sucks. If you shoot more does, you have a little bit better rut the following year. So there's definitely a balance there that needs to be found. And I think, like you said, shooting 2 does to every 1 buck is probably the right answer. I think you maybe aren't going to shoot a buck every single year. You still should probably shoot a doe or 2 if you can. And I think whether it's early season or late season, there's probably no right or wrong answer. It's just more preference. Like you said, you like to shoot them with a bow, so go out and shoot them with a bow. If you like the gun hunting more, or it's just better because, I mean, in Wisconsin it's colder, so you shoot a doe in December or January, you don't really have to worry about the meat as much as if you shoot one in September when it's 80 degrees.
Some people don't like shooting them early season, second weekend, third weekend of bow season, because then you got to go trounce through all your woods to track them, or you get a bad hit. Next thing you know, you blow up your whole your property you're hunting, and then you might be done for a couple weeks because you just blew all the deer out of there type thing. So
yeah, I mean, I definitely, if you have that type of property where you can really hammer the does late season, I definitely don't mind that as an option. And you just save it for the early season for the bucks, right? You try to not disturb it as much as possible by shooting does. Obviously, then you might miss out with your bow a little bit, but that late season can be really, really good on certain properties and certain situations, and it's definitely not anything wrong, in my opinion, with shooting does late season. Even if they're bred, I don't think that that's a problem at all.
And don't get me wrong, we're not going to every stand early season and like, oh, we'll shoot a doe. Like, there's certain stands we'll shoot them off of because it's on a field edge, or it's not in the middle of the woods where it's not going to disturb anything if they go in, or if hopefully they run out to the field and die type thing. Like, we're not going into our number one stands shooting does first and second week of bow season.
Right. So let's say it's public land and you're trying to just go put some meat in the freezer, whether you're scouting Mobily, like online, to start looking at maps online, what's something you're probably going to be looking for on public land? Somebody's trying to put meat in their freezer. What are you going to look for there?
If I'm going out on public land, I'm looking for public land right alongside egg fields.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and sit on that edge and see, because they're going to be coming out to that. They're going to be feeding. They're the type of, they're early in the season where they're going to come out hour and a half before light or before dark. So they're going to come out there and feed, and you got plenty of time to get eyes on them and even shoot one early and maybe even shoot a couple right away. I wouldn't necessarily go deep into public right away and like sit right in the middle. That's where they're bedding. That's where they're comfortable. And obviously it's public, so other people might do that. But if you do that, you might decrease your chances for later in the year. So I would try and set up a side in between bedding and food, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice no matter what time of year it is. Between bedding and food, that's pretty much the two things that control their lives. So if you can get between that, you're usually going to be in really good shape. I like what you said about the ag. If there's ag on public land, that's huge. If it's just on a neighboring property, that can be really big too. You set up a little ways into the woods where you think they're going to be traveling there. In, like we talked about, that thermal cover, when you can get into the thick stuff. And I wouldn't be afraid if you're on, if you're looking online on a map on public land during the early season. Usually hunting in pine trees is probably not going to be real great because there's not a lot of browse in there. There's just not a lot of food and cover, whatever. But in the wintertime, that can be some of the best stuff. So if you can find like some pines with some tall grass coming into some ag, that sort of transition area, man, if you can't shoot a doe or two out of that late season, I don't even know where you go.
And for early season, when I say sit over ag fields, I mean, obviously don't sit over a cornfield, because what's the point of that? Can't see in there, can't shoot there. But I mean, if you got a cornfield and then like a 60-acre strip, or even like a 10-acre strip of just like hay or wheat or just something where it's not tall, where they got to walk in between and get to the woods, that's good. I mean, bean fields are great. Killer. Yeah. I mean, they're just out there annihilating those, and you can sit and see for days and just see deer and deer and deer and learn. You can learn a lot too from those early season sets sitting over bean fields.
Oh yeah.
Where they're coming, where they're going, what they're doing, how long they're out there, where they go.
Yeah, that's the other advantage that you have late season is you got snow on the ground in a lot of places. So, and if the weather's right, but that makes it a little bit easier to scout some of the tracks, and just kind of do a little bit of that in-person scouting to try and figure some of that stuff out late season. There is talk too about like a second and third rut that can happen in the late season. That's something that I feel like you really have to have your ratios properly managed in order to have something like that, or just like a ton of does where there's not enough bucks to breed them.
We saw it a little bit, like the second weekend in December when my dad shot his doe. We had a fawn come out, and which is most likely the second rut is like the very few does who didn't get bred, or the yearlings who are coming into heat now.
Yeah.
We had a little fawn getting chased by a buck. I mean, and he was on her. He wouldn't let her go. Like, he was just sticking to her type thing, and he was chasing her kind of the whole time, and he wanted nothing to do with the does that were out there because obviously they've already been bred and weren't in heat. So
yeah,
that's the first time I've really ever seen it, but it's definitely a thing.
And if you can get into that, I mean, that's huge too. I think that's a little bit more difficult to try and scout and figure that out. It's something, like you said, you pretty much have to be there in person and observe that. It is going to be like a month after when the first rut is, and then you'd have a second rut for does or, I guess, yearling fawns that still haven't been bred, and then you can even get into a third rut in like January then, so that would be now, which, again, I think you'd have to really, really have something abnormal with your populations going on in order to really get into all of that. But that's another thing late season that if you can take advantage of that, that can be pretty huge too. So if that's something that you notice in your area, whether it's private or public, that's something that maybe not everybody's focused on. a lot of people are either tagged out already, or by the end of November, they're kind of ready to call it quits. So if you're somebody who has to hunt on public, that can really be a great thing late season when everybody else is maybe done. You could even get a second or a third rut, and just the right piece of public, the late season can really be dynamite.
I agree.
If you find the right spot,
Mm-hmm.
the right ag, and the right bedding situation, and I think you can really be set. All right, man. My meds are starting to wear off. I'm ready to wrap this up.
Yep.
So thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. Like I said earlier, it's always going to be on YouTube, on Buck Fever Outdoors. You can go find us there. You can go to buckfever.com. You can find all of our content there. You can find all of our merch there. You can find articles there. We've got some stuff written up about us. There's a lot of cool stuff there. So buckfeveroutdoors.com, if you check that out, we'd really appreciate that. On any of these, wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you're listening to it, watching it, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, if you guys really like this show and you can give us a good review, that would help us out a ton. Those 5-star reviews are huge for podcasts to do well and reach a wider audience, and just kind of give us some feedback. So if you guys like what you're seeing, like what you're hearing, a good positive review would mean the world to us. And as always with YouTube, if you could like this video, subscribe to the channel, because we're 2 weeks in a row now and we've got more to come. Next week, maybe a guest.
What do they look up to find these on these other Spotify and Apple Play?
Yeah, so it should just be Buck Fever Podcast, or the Buck Fever Podcast. It should all be there. They should all be up and running. So YouTube, Buck Fever Outdoors, that's going to be the best way to get to the Buck Fever Podcast on there. And then on any of the other platforms, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Amazon Music, all the other ones that we listed, if you just search on there, the Buck Fever Podcast, we should pop up. It's our usual logo. It's the Buck Fever orange with our logo and all of our stuff on there. So it should be pretty easy to find. And I'm really happy that we have it up on all these other platforms. And there's going to be a few more to come in the following weeks too. So it's really exciting stuff there.
Yep.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next time.